Coming up on the world today, while devastating floods hit western Germany and parts of Belgium, leaving more than 40 people dead. Prominent Dutch crime reporter Peter de Vries was shot and wounded in Amsterdam 9 days ago, has died. Pasadena begins after days of looting and violence in South Africa. A monumental failure. Beg your pardon. Welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. So here's where we are at. The floods in Europe. A monumental failure is how the professor of hydrology at the University of Reading, Hannah Cloak, describes the flooding in the continent. There have been reports of buildings collapsing, cars being swept away, roads turning into rivers, and entire villages evacuated, especially in Germany over the past 24 hours. It doesn't get any better, as authorities say people should expect more rain later.
The rains and floods have inundated villages and roads, taking over major infrastructure in Germany. Video footage shows water bursting riverbanks flowing through the streets of the town of Kielburg. Heavy rains have triggered once in 25-year floods in most parts of western Germany. The German Weather Service has issued an extreme weather warning for parts of the 3 western states. Although authorities say at least 42 people have died in the floods, they fear the figures could rise. They are also looking for dozens of people who have gone missing since the disaster. Several senior German politicians have been blaming the flooding on global warming and call for the need to speed up climate protection measures. Experts say that climate change is expected to increase the frequency of extreme weather events, but linking any single event to global warming is complicated. Chancellor Angela Merkel says she's shocked by the devastation and has sent her condolences to the relatives of the dead and missing. She's currently out of the country for a meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden, the first European leader to be welcomed to the White House. Germany is not the only one affected. Drone footage shows the extent of flood damage caused in the Belgian town of Essenex as heavy rains caused water levels to rise in large parts of the south of the country. At least 6 people have died there. Authorities have asked people to evacuate and for those who can't leave to move to upper floors of their buildings. The Prime Minister has called the situation unprecedented.
The VOA's Linda Gradstein is in southern France, from where she joins us. Linda, great to see you dry and okay. But these floods are really worrying, happening in Germany and in parts of Belgium. We've seen the videos, we've seen the pictures of the devastation it has caused. How are authorities taking care of those affected by the floods?
Well, in both Germany and Belgium, hundreds of firefighters and soldiers have been called out to try to rescue people who were still stranded on rooftops. There are dozens of people who are awaiting being rescued, and dozens of people are missing. So unfortunately, the death toll is expected to rise. In Belgium, 2 of the dead were firefighters who were trying to rescue people. So they're doing everything they can. In Belgium, they've asked 200,000 people to evacuate. So the authorities, the local authorities, are trying to save as many people as they can, and it's kind of a race against time. In Belgium, for example, they said they're afraid that the river there may just completely overflow and cause widespread devastation. And people there are saying that they don't remember anything like this. We just saw the white flags flying of people who were stranded. People have been killed in their basement. People are on their roofs. And so they're just doing everything they can to get to as many people and to save them.
Yeah, pretty dire situations there. But do we have any idea yet how much all of the damage has been caused?
No, it's too early, but you're talking about many, many millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. Angela Merkel in Washington said that she has been in touch with the finance minister to start to put together a program for, rehabilitation and for helping all of these families who have lost their homes. But I think at this point, it's still, the event is still happening. They're afraid of more rain. They're afraid of more floods. So they're not really thinking about the money yet, but it's going to be quite a heavy financial toll.
An unprecedented situation is how the Belgian authorities describe what is the rains and the floods and the devastation caused. But Germany has been the hardest hit, as well as Belgium. What's the situation in other parts of Europe? Are they also expecting heavy rains as well as floods?
Yes, there's concern especially there's already been heavy rains in Switzerland and in the Netherlands, in parts of the Netherlands. In France, where I am, there are flood warnings in about 10 different regions, more in the north. I have a friend in Paris, and she said for the past week it's just been raining nonstop. And usually it's very, very hot in the summer. It's cooler than it usually is. Where I am, it's very windy. It's sunny but windy. So yeah, there's definitely concern, and it's also, of course, playing havoc with transportation systems. And all of Europe is so linked together that something that happens in Germany and Belgium has implications beyond that. So they have certainly been the hardest hit, and that's where the focus of the events have been. And there's still concern for Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, France, and the Netherlands. That seems to be where the focus of the concern is.
Wow, Linda, to go from one extreme to another, just a few days ago, they were complaining about the heat wave in parts of Europe and in the United States, and now they're experiencing terrible floods. Thanks again, Linda, and do stay safe.
Thank you.
Well, people in the Netherlands are mourning today a prominent crime reporter who was shot and wounded in central Amsterdam 9 days ago. Well, he died today. A statement from his family says Peter de Vries was unable to win the battle. He had been in hospital since he was shot in the head after leaving a TV studio. It was a shooting that shocked the whole country, as the 64-year-old is very well known for his investigations of mobsters and drug lords. Police arrested 2 suspects in the meantime. Prime Minister Mark Rutte says the veteran journalist was afraid of nothing and no one. As we mentioned earlier, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is in the United States, where she's meeting U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Earlier today, she visited the Naval Observatory residence where Kamala Harris lives. The United States and Germany are key NATO allies, but are at odds over a host of tough issues, including the Nord Stream 2 pipeline being built from Russia to Germany under the Baltic Sea, which Washington fears will increase European reliance on Russian gas. They also disagree over the wisdom of partnering with China on business deals, continuing restrictions on travel to the United States from Europe, and Germany's opposition to temporary patent waivers aimed at speeding COVID-19 vaccine production. Let's turn to Cuba now, as the government lifts temporarily restrictions on the amount of food and medicine that travelers can bring into the country in an apparent small concession to demands by protesters who took to the streets last weekend. And we've seen more of that this week. Prime Minister Manuel Marrero said the government wants to lift customs restrictions on food, medicine, and hygiene products that are lacking in the country amid its worst economic crisis since the fall of a former ally of the Soviet Union. The measure begins next Monday, July 19, lifting restrictions until the end of the year. It's not immediate to declare how much difference the move would make, given that there are very few flights at the moment into the Caribbean island nation, which is going through its worst coronavirus outbreak since the start of the pandemic. Now, about those protests, they are continuing not only in Cuba, but in neighboring Argentina, where they're showing their support for protests in Cuba, outside the Cuban embassy in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, the capital. Many are attending these protests, chanting freedom, echoing the calls of thousands of their friends and family in Cuba who took to the streets on Sunday in the biggest anti-government demonstrations that the island nation has seen in decades. The protests erupted amid both Cuba's deepest economic crisis since the fall of the Soviet Union and a surge in COVID-19 infections that has pushed some hospitals to the edge of collapse in a country that prides itself on healthcare system. Not everyone, though, at this Buenos Aires protest is against the Cuban government. Protesters blame the U.S. blockade on the Caribbean nation for its woes. A tightening of decades-old U.S. sanctions under former President Donald Trump and the pandemic have exacerbated shortages of food and medicine, as well as power outages. You also see those protests continuing in Miami as well. And Miami has a large number of Cuban nationals in the state itself. So they have also been protesting alongside their friends and families in Cuba, chanting songs demanding freedom for Cuba, as well as waving signs with inscriptions. Remembering Haitian President Jovenel Moise, a small crowd outside the National Palace paid tribute to the country's slain president with a makeshift memorial with flower arrangements, rows of white candles, and a Haitian flag at half-mast in front of a large photograph of the former president. Scattered protests broke out in the capital Wednesday as gasoline shortages added to concerns over insecurity and access to basic goods a week after the assassination of President Moise, which pitched the Caribbean nation into uncertainty. Nearly all gas stations in Port-au-Prince, the capital, were closed. Long lines forming outside, with few of them still operating. Residents are blaming the criminal gangs that control key supply routes, as well as opportunistic black market fuel sellers who are paralyzing distribution into Haiti's biggest city. Some of the protesters set fires ablaze in the middle of gritty city streets, which remain quieter than usual after Moise's murder last week. Well, security is still topmost on the list of Afghan forces, though there have been conflicting reports about the fate of a major trading town on the border with Pakistan, which the Taliban claimed to have taken over yesterday. The government says the government forces have retaken that town from the Taliban, but insurgents insist they remain firmly in control. Looking at this footage of large crowds of people riding on vehicles carrying Taliban flags near the Shaman border point, people waiting on Pakistani side of the border said they were unable to cross. Taliban fighters captured the spin Boldak Shaman border post on Wednesday, which is the second most important crossing on the border with Pakistan and a major source of revenue for the Western-backed government in Kabul. A senior government official says the security forces have retaken control of the town just hours after it was seized by the Taliban. But according to Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid, well, that is not true. He says his forces are still holding on to the town. Lebanese politician Saad al-Hariri has abandoned efforts to form a new government, saying it is clear he would not be able to reach an agreement with President Michel Aoun, plunging the country deeper into political crisis. Lebanon is already suffering an economic depression that the World Bank has described as one of the most severe in modern history. Its currency has lost more than 90% of its value in less than 2 years, leading to spiraling poverty and crippling shortages. It's an obvious alternative must be filled now with the government by a Sunni Muslim in Lebanon's sectarian system. There is little hope, however, that a government can start fixing the economic situation as soon as possible. Al-Hariri says President Aoun has requested fundamental changes to the cabinet lineup that he presented to him on Wednesday. But the president told Hariri that they would not be able to agree. You're still watching The World Today. Still ahead. Well, they're back. We're talking about dozens of goats eating their way through Riverside Park in New York. We have more coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. A week of violence that has engulfed South Africa slowly began to ebb today, and people counted the costs of an orgy of arson and looting that has destroyed hundreds of businesses and killed at least 70 people. The military has been called up its reservists in a bid to tackle the violence, which security forces have so far been unable to stop. In the meantime, many businesses were lost in the violence in South Africa. Correspondent Brian Pugeni reports.
Calm is slowly returning to Soweto in Johannesburg, where various malls and businesses were looted and vandalized in the past week. Cleanup operations have begun here in Soweto Diepkloof. As you can see behind me, community members rallying to clean up what they call their mall. It's a much better site than what it was a couple of days ago when we visited the area. This is one of the malls which was looted and ransacked by looters in the unrest which we've seen in the past couple of days. Several government officials have been deployed to the affected areas to help. At the Diepkloof Center, we had the Minister of Forestry and Fisheries, Barbara Chrissy.
We can only join those who have condemned the wanton violence and destruction that has destroyed malls and infrastructure both here in Gauteng and also in KZN. But I think we do have to take this opportunity to salute our citizens and community members who have come out over the last couple of days, first of all, to defend these institutions, but secondly and most importantly, to lead the cleanup campaign.
The cleaning has started, I think, about 2 days ago. The response is overwhelming to an extent that we even turn other people back because we don't want to have a huge group.
While some malls still look a mess, some, like the Maponya Mall, were spared, shielded from looters, first by community volunteers and now the security agencies. Damage to property is estimated at 15 billion rand, and the impact of these violent actions will affect other supply chains as food and fuel shortages have been forecast. With many businesses being damaged, this will also affect the unemployment market, with the country's unemployment rate already at an all-time high of 32.6%.
Shop owners might not renew their leases because of now. They're not sure if they are safe. Because each and every one has lost millions.
There will be no doubt that a lot of small businesses have lost their employment for good. And they, not only the business owners, but the employees working for them are also likely to have lost their jobs. And unfortunately, it's mainly your small black-owned entrepreneurial businesses that have been opening up in little townships, in little shopping centers, who've been completely wiped out.
Though some parts of the country are peaceful, there are still sporadic attacks in some areas, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, where buildings are still being torched, and the violence now has some racial colorations in some instances. Government's immediate plan is to ensure peace returns to the whole country so as to achieve its long-term goals to rebuild and to get the road to economic recovery back on track. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Brian Pugeni, Channels Television News.
The World Health Organization Director General Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus has called on China to be more transparent with investigations into the origin of the coronavirus pandemic, as they were hampered by a lack of raw data on the first days of the spread in the country. A WHO team spent 4 weeks in and around the general city of Wuhan, with Chinese researchers and said in a joint report in March that the virus had probably been transmitted from bats to humans through another animal. Here's a global update. According to the WHO team that participated in the investigation, introduction to the coronavirus through a laboratory incident was considered to be extremely unlikely pathway, but countries, including the United States and some scientists, have not been satisfied with the explanation.
We are asking actually China to be transparent, open, and cooperate, especially on the information raw data that we asked for at the early days of the pandemic.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says Africa recorded a 40% rise in COVID-19 deaths this week compared with last week, as infections and hospital admissions have jumped and countries face shortages of oxygen and intensive care beds. The WHO says Africa's case fatality rate, the proportion of deaths among confirmed cases, currently stands at 2.6% against the global average. Hundreds more bodies than usual are being taken for funerals every day in junta-led Myanmar as a new wave of COVID-19 sweeps through the country. The accounts from different parts of Myanmar point to the daily tolls being higher than those given by the Health Ministry, which recorded 145 fatalities on Wednesday. Finally, Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the worst of the coronavirus pandemic would be behind the country if it is careful, meaning that the economy could recover like a coiled spring.
With every day that goes by, we build higher the wall of vaccine-acquired immunity, a wall that is now higher and stronger in this country than almost anywhere else in the world.
His comment comes as medics fear a surge in flu and other respiratory viruses could put pressure on people's health and the NHS this winter. We're looking at 24 goats from Green Oats Farm in Rhinebeck, New York, who have journeyed to Riverside Park in Manhattan to munch an invasive weed farm. It's an environmentally friendly win-win for invasive species removal at Riverside Park. The goats get to feast on overgrown bushes and Riverside Park Conservancy does not have to dump harsh chemicals on weeds and poison ivy. Goats are an ingenious approach to weed removal, harnessing the goat's natural hunger for leafy greens as the primary mechanism behind the task, which traditionally involves pollutant chemicals. They even eat species dangerous to humans like poison ivy. Of the 24 goats participating in this exercise, 5 will call Riverside Park its home through to the end of August, eating their way through 2 acres of the park. And of those 5 goats, Buckles, Chalupa, Malima, Miss Bo Peep, and Skittles, all names of the goats. The public can vote in a ranked choice voting system to determine which of them will be crowned the greatest of all time. The winner will be announced at the end of the summer.
Oh, you want to wait? He's there, but he wasn't doing it.
Today, we are happy to say that they are back. From Green Goats Farm in Rhinebeck, New York, each retired from past careers and ready to help us care for this incredible and unique public space.
Well, Buckles, Chalupa, Malima, Miss Bo Peep, and Skittles, who are you rooting for? Well, that's it on The World Today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Amarachi Ubani.